Nate, thank you very much for coming on the show, man. I really, really appreciate this. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This is so. I'm interested to speak to you. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to a whole load of people that have worked with the younger population. And as someone who grew up through rugby, obviously in the States you guys have American football. Rugby is kind of our equivalent over here. And I grew up with rugby and progressed and played to a very, very, very high level. So I kind of know what the process is like myself. I know a lot of people don't know how it is, and I love being able to connect with people like yourself who have been at the helm of training young athletes who are excelling in their careers. And I'm really, really interested to kind of get to understand kind of your principles and methods in regards to that. I understand you're a big proponent of the conjugate method in terms of training. Is this something that you used to work with your athletes at all? Would you work with standard periodization? What kind of stuff were you usually about?
Well, I stumbled onto the conjugate method when I was playing college football. We really didn't have a strength coach, so it was kind of like me and a few other guys were always just kind of reading stuff and researching and trying to find things out. And we had a football player here in America, Mike Allstott, played fullback for the Buccaneers, and this dude was like 265, but could run like a tailback.
Yeah.
So, and I played fullback a little bit. So my thought process was, what is this guy doing? You know what I mean? So I was thinking, if I train like he does, I can do the shit he does, which doesn't.
As we come to learn, isn't the case at all.
Yeah, unfortunately. So that's kind of how I read he was training with bands on his squat and stuff, and that's kind of how I stumbled onto the conjugate method, and that was, back early 2000s, and then from there I kind of stumbled onto Elite FTS and found some articles that Dave wrote and stuff. So that was kind of how I kind of stumbled onto the system, and as soon as I started using it, I could tell it was different, and I was feeling better than I had before. You know what I mean? So I didn't really have any results or anything to prove it, but I was like, there's something to this. Cause
you just know, don't you, in your training?
What's that?
You just know in your training, like when you get in the gym, you can feel it. Like when you start having those good sessions and you have them on a regular basis, you're like, oh shit, I'm definitely doing something right here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, for me personally, I can tell that stuff pretty early. Like if I try something new, you know what I mean? I feel like, and you get it too, like you train, you kind of know whether or not it's bullshit or not.
Yeah, dude, when you've been training since you're like 12, 13 years of age, you understand your body. I think that's the thing. I'm quite young, but even I have the ability to coach people because I understand what the body has to go through in order to achieve those results. I know what that feels like because I've gone through the hardship myself. And if you haven't done that, then you don't really understand. You can't gauge one workout to another unless you've been training for a very, very long time. And then you know the variables.
Absolutely. That's why it's important that we train. You know what I mean? So we understand that.
100%. So,
that's a huge.
do you did you have those influences with the bands and chains and stuff? And was that something that you wanted to implement with younger population? Because I was speaking to another guest not too long ago who was kind of talking about the fact that you don't always necessarily want to work with bands and chains with young athletes because they need to progress on the core lifts first. They need to understand how to squat perfectly before they squat with bands and bench, etc., etc. So is that kind of the same principle that you're thinking about with your training and how you're training athletes?
No. So to me, like as long as the athlete is pretty proficient in the basic movement, you can start putting bands and chains on early as long as it's scaled for their strength level. And that's kind of what we did once. So like 10 years after college or whatever, I got into the college sector and was coaching. That's what we would do. So it would take like probably a month or so to kind of break them in and get them box squatting correctly and deadlifting and benching and all that stuff. And then we would start putting bands and chains on, like as soon as even within a couple of weeks sometimes, because they would pick it up quick. So like to me, if you can do the movement correctly, the coaching cues and how you move aren't that much different when you put the bands and chains on, so why not take advantage of those resources?
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting that you kind of said that, talking about cues. Working with a lot of young people, often these movements like the squat, the bench, the deadlift, although they look incredibly simple, there's a hell of a lot going on with the movements, and there are 1,001 cues that you can give at any one time for a particular athlete, and obviously every athlete is completely different. And I was actually listening back over to the table talk you did with Dave Tate, where you're talking about kind of, if I was to cue this athlete with sitting into your heels and he goes away and he tells all of his friends, this is what Dave says that you have to do, that's the cue for that particular person. So it's going to be completely freaking useless when it comes around to someone else, because they might already sit back into their heels, and if they sit back into their heels anymore, they're too upright and they don't have this and they don't have that. So when you're working with young people, how do you simplify your cues in order to help them? Because it's a lot for young people to kind of learn at one stage.
Yeah, I think this is an advantage to being kind of a rockhead myself. Like, I have to think to myself first, how would I understand this if I had a bar in my back? You know what I mean? So just keep it real simple. Don't try to use any sciencey terms. Just like, for instance, like when we bench, one of our big ones was punch and squeeze your hands. You know what I mean? So very open your knees. That's it. It should be 2 to 3 words. It should be fix one thing at a time. That's kind of, you start throwing 2 to 3 different things at a kid while they're squatting, and it turns into a shit show.
100%.
And it's funny you mentioned the cueing thing. I've found a lot of times it's almost like when you learn a new skill, you almost have to overemphasize or overstate things for people to actually get it. So like you said, if this kid goes to his friends and says the same thing, like, it's probably not going to work because they don't see the same thing that you or I would see. It's also what the coaches see it too. But what I found a lot of times, you almost have to overemphasize things for the people to get it.
Yeah, you're taking things to extremes because actually people don't understand that, and when you take it to an extreme, they try and replicate that, but a lot of new people, they will only replicate up until a point of which they feel safe, which for them is actually far less than what we need. So by overemphasizing it, we actually get them just about to that point, but usually not quite there, and then we have to work with them to get comfortable into those positions, which brings me around to the box squat, the famous box squat. I've heard loads of different arguments on both sides of the fence with kind of like long-term athlete development, young people, should they be box squatting? Is it compressing too much on the spine? Is it actually helping them to solidify their hips, which is going to help with a ton of different athletic capabilities? Where do you sit with this?
So when I was coaching, we box squatted 99.9% of the time. The only time we would really put it in is if a sporting coach, kind of, demanded it or was really, really into it. We would put it in there to kind of keep them happy. If an athlete was real adamant about it, if a kid did a good job and kind of earned the right to have some feedback and say, hey, I feel better free squatting, can we do, then we would put those things in. But to me, it's so much simpler to teach. It's so much easier to recover from. I think it really helps keep the knees healthy. If you can stay back and keep a vertical shin. We had, in the teams that I worked that worked directly under me, we had 1 ACL tear in 10 years. Now, to be fair, I didn't work with football that whole time, so that doesn't include football.
Okay.
But, there is wrestling in there, and you know what I mean? It's just, to me, they're not a power lifter, so they don't have to free squat. Who cares? I don't care what they squat. I know if they train right and do the things right, they're going to get stronger and they're going to be better. The only reason we tested maxes was so the kids and coaches could see them. I didn't give a shit, really.
It's so funny that, isn't it? It's a case of that. It's never necessarily the coach that wants to see what the 1RM potential is. It's always the kid, or it's always someone that wants to, put that number into a spreadsheet. It's like, okay, well, actually, realistically, it doesn't matter. If they can move the weight, they can move the weight, and if they're doing it efficiently, then they're doing a good job, and they're doing what they should be doing. We shouldn't really be worrying about numbers too much. So that's interesting. So with obviously, you talk about the fact that it's a lot easier to recover from. Now, for young kids that are playing, when I was at my peak with my rugby, I was training 5 times a week and playing on another day, and I would have 1 day off, and I would have two gym sessions, a sprint session, and then would have technique and training sessions out on the field. So, the body is just beaten up and jacked up. And I was like 16, 17 years of age, and I'm there at college with scholarships with guys that are having like full-on knee replacement surgeries at 17, 18 years of age, and it's just absolutely crazy. So I'm really, really keen to get onto this whole idea of, should more strength coaches be taking out your freestanding squat and replacing it with something like the box squat, and what are these huge benefits that we're getting from it compared to our standard freestanding squat?
Yeah, that was my thought. For whatever reason, we have this idea that harder is better, and you have to train hard, but like anytime I would bring up the advantages, like a lot of times, not anytime, I'd bring up the advantages of a box squat to a sport coach. They were almost turned off when I said, well, it's easier to recover from. It doesn't beat your kids up so bad. You could see, like, they did not like that because they want their kids to be tough and hard, and, this is supposed to be fucking hard. And it's just like, dude, we can still get them strong. They will still get fast. They will feel better on game day. You would still get pushback from it. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy, and you feel like you're actually going to get more, like a higher level of feedback from a broader range of athletes. When you look at sports teams, there are always going to be those kids that are going to go balls to the walls no matter what. And there are also, on the other end of the spectrum, going to be a lot of kids that, have natural talent and ability, or maybe they've done it for a long time, and they don't necessarily have that work ethic of, I'm just going to be busting my balls 24/7, 365, because they're just not programmed like that. So I think that way you're probably going to be getting more out of more athletes, right?
Absolutely. And that's kind of like with the whole system, I always thought the way it was set up, we kind of achieved that with it. Just it's like the movements for the most part that are popular are pretty simple. You're going to train the muscle groups in the areas you need to train without having to put too much emphasis on the weight room. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
yeah, no.
I always say, if I'm going to cut down a tree, I'm going to use a chainsaw, not a steak knife. Like, to me, it was just very efficient, very easy to put in place. And even like you mentioned, the kids that aren't real motivated, we still saw great progress from them, and we didn't have to be like militant assholes in the weight room either. Like, we need to work out up, and we would change all the time, and the kids come in and train, and for the most part, we could just coach.
Yeah.
So it was weird how a lot of things kind of took care of themselves. I don't know exactly what that is, but I kind of attribute it to the system.
Yeah, and it's nice as well because obviously from kind of a strength coach standpoint, obviously you're only at kind of like college level, you're only getting to work with these kids for X number of years. This isn't a pro team where you're having guys that are potentially on the roster for kind of 5, 6, 7 seasons, and you're getting really long-term progression with them. You're receiving them as a semi kind of put together adult. They have their own views. Their body is already started to form in certain ways. They've probably already got some really shit technique from doing stuff by themselves before they've come to you. So, you've got very limited period of time to be able to take these athletes, turn them into to bring all the full potential out of them, and then kind of let them go on and blossom themselves. So what other kind of, hack exercises like you're doing with the box squat? Do you have like a variation for the bench? Obviously, there's a lot of skepticism around deadlifting in the weights room, especially at like D1. You see a lot of people that are replacing this with kind of a lot more posterior chain work, snatches, cleans, things where you can't load anywhere near as more maximally. What are your kind of hacks in that?
Deadlift was one that we had to kind of be careful with. We didn't do it with everybody. We kind of kept that one for our groups that were more motivated and more focused. If a group couldn't deadlift, you can always do an RDL. That's pretty easy to teach.
And is this conventional deadlift, by the way, or is this like a hex bar?
We didn't use hex bars. A lot of times our deadlift progression we would start out and teach them just with the pull. So it would be light, sub-maximum weight. Sometimes we would do it off pins with longer athletes, so they'd have to squat down so far. And then we would teach them using speed reps and sets to do a sumo deadlift. And then once they got the hang of that and they were pretty good with it, then we could start progressing heavier. And then, so probably about after a month, we would start doing some conventional stuff too. And the reasoning was they were pretty bad with their feet being out wide. So we gave them like a month or whatever to kind of get used to that. And once they
Is
got
that
better
just
at
general
it,
weakness in the hips because they're underdeveloped at that age, or what?
yeah, that's the biggest thing. People will say mobility and this and that. Most of it's because they're just piss weak. They're not used to having their feet out there, so they can't handle it.
Yeah, they don't have that abduction
So
strength.
that was
Those
kind of
guys aren't strong
yeah,
enough.
yeah, and even to progress even further than RDLs, like we didn't RDL a lot, maybe once a week. But our other go-tos for posterior chain would be reverse hyper, back raise, single leg back raise, and then obviously the knee flexion options too. But
Yeah, it's amazing. So obviously the reverse hyper is, I feel like, something that is it has become almost common knowledge over in the States. You guys seem to have them in almost any gym where anyone's lifting anything half decent. I feel like it's an area that no one really speaks about that much, especially kind of this side of the pond, so to speak. I feel like there's so much benefit to it, and I've done it myself, and it's frustrating because I'm at a gym where I don't have a reverse hyper, so I'm trying every experimentation under the sun to try and replicate the same movement. But
yeah,
it's one of those things where you do really need that decent bit of kit to be able to get the full benefit.
yeah, it might have something to do with shipping and handling. It costs a lot to get that shit over there.
Yeah, it's
No,
it's a
but
funny way of it.
like like I used to have low back problems, and I never got imaging done or anything. But I'm pretty sure if I didn't get on reverse hyper more, I wouldn't be training anymore. And once I started doing that 2 or more times a week, my issues started to really within a couple months. It really helped. So
And is
we
that
put
body weight? Is that weighted? Is that resistance band? What are you doing there?
weighted. I was on an actual machine, an actual reverse hyper.
Okay.
And then, so from then on, like our athletes did it twice a week, at least once a week. But most of the times we would do like a heavy day where we would take like, and this is, I think I heard this from Louis somewhere, around 75% of your squat max, and then hit 4 sets of 20 with it. And so that was our heavy day. And then on our lighter day, we would maybe cut that in half or so, or about half. And we might do 4 sets of 30, 4 sets. Some groups would go up to 4 sets of 60. So we were doing a lot of volume. Yeah.
That's a
But the
hell of
thing
a lot of
is,
volume.
yeah, but it's recuperative. So it's not like you do that with a squat, you're going to kick the shit out of yourself. But that's almost restorative at the same time.
That's crazy. So there's so much glute development going on there. Like the posterior chain is just so strong. So do you think that that's like a missing link with a lot of people, that their glutes just aren't strong enough? Because there's no way that your glutes can't get ridiculously strong if you're doing 4 sets of 60 on anything, even just body weight, man. That's a glute pump
Yeah.
from hell.
Yes, that's a huge area of that people are missing. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know. I think a lot of people program too many just big exercises. They think you have to squat, RDL, lunge, everything compound movement within a workout to make progress. But, you know, at some point you got to kind of target those muscle groups that you're going after. Just make it simple. Make it simple for the athlete. You know what I mean? Like you can't. It's like you said. You can't do 4 sets of 60 and not have your glutes smoked.
Yeah.
You know. So that was kind of.
And would you say that something like that? Obviously, if you're going to do 60 repetitions, you're going to have to go much lighter weight. Are you going to gain more benefit from that from, let's say, like a heavy hip thrust or something? Because I see like a lot of people are now kind of using glute development through hip thrust, and there are various different hip thrust machines. But from what I've experienced, obviously that's going to be putting pressure through your back unless your technique is perfect. And I myself, I can even find it, I can load up 220, 240 in hip thrust for kind of sets of 8 to 10. It's fine. But I know if I catch it a mil wrong, then my back's like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. If you don't have a reverse hyper, you got to find other ways, But if you can't, that's why I liked it, because it was safe. It's hard to screw up. You know what I mean? And we didn't start there. So like, let's say we had a team who had never. There's a lot of teams that have never done that before, reverse hyper. Let's say maybe women's swimming. So for week one might, instead of what I just talked about, would probably look like a 25 on each side of the reverse hyper, which is really easy, and they might do 3 sets of 15. And then over the course of weeks, we'll build them up to be used to that volume. But once we got up there, that was kind of like their standard. That was kind of the standard thing, we'd back them down.
Are you warming up with that? Is that like a finisher? Is this kind of mid workout? Where are you putting that?
So our 4 work sets, like I talked about, that was kind of mid workout. That was usually probably the 3rd or 4th movement. So like a typical lower body, just the lifts. I'm not talking about jumps or anything. We do like our big movement, max effort or speed work. And then our next movement would be another big barbell movement, the supplementary. So the reverse hyper would probably be the next one or the one after that. And that would be the 4 sets. But a lot of times we would use reverse hyper or back extension to warm up too. So we would do 2 sets of 20 lighter at the beginning of the workout before they did any jumps or anything to help warm up and get blood to where we were going to train.
Yeah. Sounds
I mean, some days we could be doing like 6 sets of reverse hyper.
Yeah, 100%. So you kind of, with what you've said there, in terms of how you're structuring the sessions and kind of with the mix of maximum and dynamic, obviously you're changing your loads, you're changing your volume, you're fluctuating it a lot. Is that another way that you're just keeping that recovery rate like nice and steady? You're not overloading it too much? Do you feel like that there are a lot of strength coaches that are actually putting too much emphasis on strength, which sounds a bit crazy, but
I want to be careful with that because I think we're at a place now where we're not seeing enough emphasis on strength, but I know what you're saying. I think there's a better way to go about it. You know what I mean? Just by picking your movements.
Well, that's interesting. I want to hop off and kind of go on to what you say there. So when you say you don't feel like there's enough strength being done, what do you mean by that? Is this kind of like not enough maximal stuff, or people aren't working to their true RPEs, or what is it?
Yeah, part of that, basketball is a sport that I feel like is going in this direction, especially like we get into this functional stuff, and not that stuff's bad or like prehab stuff or kind of, I hate the word sport specific, but there's should be some of that in your training. But when your entire training goal leans towards one thing too much, you're in trouble. And I think that's kind of where we're headed. And I think there's not much importance on maximal strength anymore. Just getting fucking strong, building big, strong, freaky athletes.
Yeah. I know, I love that because that's such a brilliant point, and you're seeing it more and more every day on platforms like Instagram. You're getting people doing these weird, quirky, functional things that stabilizes this and helps with structural development of that, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, your structural development is good, but if you can't squat body weight, then what's the fucking point of you doing it anyway?
Absolutely. Not everybody has to be, like, your athlete shouldn't be a world record squat holder. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But they should be an ass kicker.
But yeah, as an athlete, you should be proficient at moving weight regardless, because it's going to help you with your motor pattern function. It's going to help you with greater activation. You're going to bring out so much more of your own potential. It kind of seems silly not to do that. So what do you think that kind of the industry needs to see more of then? Do you think that we need to kind of take maybe a step back from this kind of prehab, rehab, mobilize, develop, balance, and just go back to, can you squat, bench, and deadlift or overhead press to these parameters?
Yeah, I think there needs to be probably a little more of that. Yeah, and, make sure, like you talked about, make sure the movement's proficient. That has to be there first, and then just like getting real strong will fix 90% of your problems. And not to say you should take that other stuff out of the program, but it's like making a meal. What's your steak and potatoes? That should be your main course. That should be your strength. Stop worrying so much about the fucking cupcakes at the end.
It's brilliant. A note I literally have here in my show notes is talking about the emphasis on like side orders to your main meal, and how we're worrying too much about what all of these like accoutrements to the meal is, but we're not actually worried about what we're actually here to do and get done. which is it's a really interesting point that you bring up. So, in terms of bringing your athlete development up with the guys that you're getting to work with, is your stuff? Are you forced into more of a periodization approach because you have kind of closed seasons? It's not necessarily like powerlifting where you can program for a meet at any point of the year. These guys, they're going to be playing in the summer term this sport, and then maybe they're not playing so much of this in the summer term, and in the winter term they're turning to this or this or this.
We didn't periodize a whole lot. I hate doing long, drawn-out training plans. What we would basically do when we got them in there, see where they were at and kind of meet them there, and then we'd gradually bring them along. Obviously, if we were in season, we would back things down. You know what I mean? The only time we would peak would be like, say, for nationals or a big conference meet. We would start working 8 to 12 weeks back from that, and then work them into a peak. But yet we would just kind of see where they were at and just try to keep progressing along. We really didn't have a lot of,
I love that. Stuff. And it seems to be kind of a trending factor with a lot of higher end coaches that it's very much every answer becomes, well, it depends. It's a case of, okay, well, these athletes today are primed and ready to be able to do squats. These athletes are so jacked up that they can't do squats. So why the hell would we make everyone do squats? Because I'm only going to get 15% of my team being able to reach maximum potential. So when you do that, when are you finding that out? Is this something you're finding out in the warm-up? Are you talking to your athletes? Are you saying, hey, guys, look, what's jacked up? Where are you struggling? Where are you feeling pain?
Yeah, usually, when they come in the room, you can kind of see where their mood is, how they're acting. I always used what I would call my indicator kids, the kids that come and work hard and do what they're supposed to do. We would get their feedback and see what they were thinking. Like, to me, if you're not doing the work, your feedback doesn't matter because it skews the whole thing. Like, you haven't done shit. Of course you're going to feel good. Of course you're going to feel fine. So we would kind of go by the kids that worked hard. But that's really how we did it. And we would, not to say, we would plan, so from a periodization standpoint, we would kind of wave volume in and out and stuff to make sure they were recovered. We would try to creep their volume up and build their work capacity and stuff, but that, from a periodization standpoint, that was about it.
Well, that's cool. So are you a believer that kind of the ideals behind conjugate, so not necessarily kind of your original conjugate, but everyone can make their own adaptations to conjugate, and I'm sure there are thousands of people that have asked you what adaptations you make to your version of conjugate, because everyone's, I feel, is slightly different at this stage. Do you feel that is far more beneficial for these younger athletes than what we've seen, where we're just kind of crunching numbers, we're putting kids through the system, you have to hit X on this week and Y on that week, or you're not kind of up to standards?
To me, that's one of the biggest advantages. Like, for max effort method, they just come in and lift what they can lift that day. So it takes into account all their outside stressors, all this other bullshit they got to deal with, and they just push hard for what they have that day, and then they go do their accessory work. Whereas if I'm working off of a predetermined max, like you and I both train, so we damn well know, like, let's say I squatted 800 in my last meet, I can't work off that 800 all the time, because that 800 is on that day. You know what I mean? Like, 3 months away from that, I may be 50 pounds ahead of that, or maybe 50 pounds below. And then, like, they don't like to train anyways. You know what I mean? So, like to me, I love to train. But if I know I have to go in and do the same movement every week, I start to dread it. I don't want to train. So, like, for an athlete whose number one priority is not training, that's why switching the exercises up, I think, is a huge advantage. So, like, to me, I'm obviously biased, but, like, the whole conjugate thing with athletes just makes total sense.
Yeah, 100%. And at the end of the day, if you have experience in the field with using this and you have seen the results for yourself firsthand, it's not bullshit. you know it works, and you can see in your athletes' faces how they're feeling, what their performance is, and if it's a case of that, you know, they're coming back from games and they're convincingly winning games, and they're coming into training on like kind of the Monday and the Tuesday, and they're like, you know what, coach, I'm not feeling too beaten up. You're like, well, dude, my job here's done, because this is what we want. We want you to be feeling 1,000% all the time. It's physically impossible, so we'll take, you know, half of that, and then just keep on going and just keep on growing and keep on getting stronger and keep on getting faster.
Yeah, and that's where you'll get buy-in too, because they'll start to understand you're trying to help them and not just beat the shit out of them in the weight room, and then they'll start training harder.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I know, you know, I sit down with friends now, and we look back at the old strength coaches and stuff that we've had, and man, they used to evoke fear like nothing else I've ever had in my entire life. I think, oh man, I've got a weights training session with Nick Reese this Wednesday, and all of a sudden I'll be like, heart's palpitating, I'm getting sweaty, I'm like, oh man, I just know I'm not walking out of that room, and it just, oh man, it scared the crap out of me. But then like I'd walk out and I'd feel good because I was hungry for it and I did well that day. But yeah, 100%, I think there's a lot of that kind of fear approach to a lot of this training, where we're going, well, who are we trying to be afraid of? Like, we're all on the same team here, we're trying to get fucking strong together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. And like you mentioned the fear thing. Like I had a sport coach one time. She wanted her kids to think I was crazy. And like she's like, just kick somebody out. I don't care who it is, just pick someone and kick. I don't care if they're doing anything wrong. Kick them out. I need them to think you're crazy. You know? But I go, coach, they're doing a great job. Your girls are like, they're killing it. She's like, I don't care. They need to fucking think you're crazy. It's like, okay.
Oh my god. Yeah. That's like that's one way to ruin the entire team's kind of balance, or respect for coaching staff or anything. You're like, yeah, that's insane. You're jeopardizing your entire season for what? Like that extra 2% that you might get out of someone because they're scared. It's like, no, man, inspire someone.
Yeah, I don't know. It's that old school, mentality. It's weird.
Yeah, 100%. So how... I find it interesting because obviously, with things like social media out there, everyone has access to so much more information now. So we're seeing, the level of athlete is becoming much, much higher now. If we look back now to kind of where the kids coming out of college are now compared to kind of 20, 30, 40 years ago with the knowledge that we have, it's quite incredible. But I also feel, I mean, this might just be me personally, but I feel like a lot of younger people are looking at kind of videos online, coaches, fully grown adults that are hitting these lifts, and they are wanting to train like adults. And I want to kind of touch on the point of, do you feel like that these younger guys should be training like adults? And if not, why? And what should they be doing differently?
I think it's like for younger athletes, I think it's okay to push hard. I think maxing can be done within reason. I think the problem comes in is when they're not technically sound. That's when you're going to get fucked up. I think another dangerous thing is, and I even fell into this a little bit myself with social media. I got to a point where when I was kind of at my height of my strength, I would see these guys do stuff, and I'd kind of get that, fuck that guy, I can do that. You know what I mean? So it would turn into a situation where I was pushing myself. I was pushing too hard when I didn't need to. You know what I mean? You see that 30-second clip, oh, this guy benches 600 all year round. That's not necessarily the truth. So it's good that you want to compete with that, but if you have your foot on the gas all damn year long, get into some trouble. So I think those, I think seeing those things is very cool, because I think it's starting to raise strength everywhere very quickly, because it's like the 6-minute mile thing or whatever, like once, or 5-minute mile, whatever. As soon as a guy ran it, more and more people started doing it. So I think people are seeing freaky stuff being done, and they realize it can be done. But you got to be patient. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It can go both ways.
100%. I love that, and that is a point that I desperately want to get onto. Patience. Young people and patience are two things that we understand do not go hand in hand. Kids want things. They want to be the best, the fastest, the strongest, the fittest. They want to be D1 tomorrow, and people need to understand that it just does not happen overnight. So for you, what do you like to do to kind of get those people to slow the process down and to kind of, slap yourself, get out of this? This is your journey, that's their journey.
It's just a process, and like I said before, it's good that they want that because that's what's going to push the limits. But like with my athletes, it was always just like they would get pissed off because they didn't PR on a certain lift at a certain time of year, or they were down 20 pounds on whatever lift that we might have picked that day. It's like, who cares? You had a meet yesterday. You threw your shot put yesterday and then traveled 8 hours home, and then you're in here today lifting. You're probably not going to PR. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? The big thing is you came in and pushed hard for today to kind of keep yourself going. That's the big. It's just constant communication and kind of reel them in and bring them back to earth, I guess.
100%. So how much, when you're coaching these kids, how much cover time a week are you getting with them to kind of get into their ears and get into their heads and kind of telling them this sort of stuff?
A couple of. You get a few hours. You get at least an hour at the training session. That's 3 to 4 times a week. And then we always had, like, our weight room was kind of just kind of open. Kids would come in and hang out, between classes and stuff like that. So, like, I let kids use my office, They would store they had all the throwers' chucks in there and shit like that. So we got quite a bit of FaceTime, honestly. It was we had a lot of teams would float. So, like, we had scheduled teams, but even if there was a team training, kids would walk through and stuff. So you get quite a bit.
It's nice, yeah, because it kind
Plus you're at practice and stuff and games.
Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? It's almost like it's a community, and I think that's such a big thing with teams, is that when teams are kind of like that and they have the ability to spend lots of time together, they can kick back, they can relax, they can chill out, then they can go out, they can work together, they can sweat together, they can get better together, and then they can go out and they can play together. It changes the relationship of the team, man, 100%. Like, everyone, I'm sure, because everyone goes through that hardship together and everyone fucking struggles and everyone sucks and everyone's breathing out of their ass in training, because you've gone through it all together, you know what it feels. So it's like everyone has this weird camaraderie and connection, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's another reason strength coaches should train. Just so your kids or your athletes understand that you get it. Not to say you have to do exactly the same stuff they do or whatever, but if they know that you're training and trying to hit a goal or something, and they see that every once in a while, I think that'll help with the buy-in. Because how many times when you were a young athlete and your coach was making you run your ass off, did you think to yourself, I'd like to see your fat ass out here doing it? You know what I mean?
Oh, that was,
so if you're training, I think every damn time, you're like, let's go, fat ass, come run.
Yeah, there was always a strength coach there would always force us to do pull-ups, and he would only always demonstrate one pull-up with just really shitty form because you just knew that he couldn't do them. And he's standing there going, come on, Grant, we're doing sets of 10 today. And I'm like, motherfucker, you can't even do 2. How are you allowed to tell me to do 10?
Yep. I think every athlete's had that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of like leading from the front. I think is something that is a big thing. If the kids are aspiring to be more like you, in the gym and kind of taking on board your core values, not only do you get that connection, but I also think you have the opportunity to really impact on these young kids that obviously at an age where they're really developing and they're really kind of trying to find their own core values, not only just with their life, but with training as well, and how training feels for them, which, for anyone that has trained for a long time or has played sports, it's just kind of in your blood, and you can't, like, I know there'll never be a time where I'm not training because it's my life now. I want to do it forever, but you have to find out what works for you, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's nice
Yeah.
that you get that
Like,
time
it's
and you
like
can
eating
find
and
out.
breathing for. You there still?
Yep.
Okay. I thought it cut out for a second. My fault.
So, you know, when you look back now at how you kind of train now with all the adaptations that you've made over the years with your style of conjugate, and you look back at how you used to train when, you know, when you were playing ball and you were training really, really hard, do you think that you being able to carry that training back would have developed your career much further? Do you feel like you definitely could have got more out of what you were doing if you were using the training style that you're using now, that's adapted to your body now, back then? Or do you feel like you can kind of rest your hat and say, you know what, I've done everything that I could have done there?
Um, I probably would have been an NFL All Pro had I trained this way. Joke. No, you know, I've done that. I think I did everything I could because it was all I knew. You know what I mean? If I would have known better, I think I could have done better. I think it definitely would have helped. Um, you know, and I always go back to box squats. Like I was kind of a tight, my hips were kind of tight and kind of inflexible person, you know, athlete or whatever. Had I known how to train and kind of train, like I think it definitely would have opened my hips up. I probably wouldn't have had the back problems I had. Probably in that in turn probably would have made me a little faster, a little more mobile. You know what I mean? So I definitely wish I knew then what I know now, but I can't. You know what I mean? I feel, you know, for knowing what I knew, I feel like I did everything I could. You know?
That's such a wonderful way of putting it. You know, and I look back and I kind of think, well, especially with kind of my rugby career, that was kind of the case too. You know, you kind of give everything you can, but if you were to have an opportunity to go back and do it all again with the knowledge that you have now, Jesus, would things be different? And I think back to when I was doing my I trained with a professional academy in their kind of their long-term athlete development program right up until the age of 18 before you sign on for the pro team. And I remember when I started hitting the gym with them and their strength coach at kind of the age of 13, like really getting into it. You know, everyone else was barbell squatting for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks before I could. So I'm 6'8". I grew very, very quickly. When I was like 16 years of age, I was like 6'7", 6'7.5". Like I was very, very tall for my frame, and I just did not have the skeletal muscle structure. So I couldn't sit upright in a squat. I couldn't open my hips out. I was super immobile in my calves because I'm playing rugby like 5 times a week, and my calves are all jacked up. So I think back now and I'm like, man, if only I had the ability to be able to box squat back then, I probably would have been squatting a lot faster than these other guys. So it's like, oh man, it's so interesting to think about those things going back.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like that's another kind of trend we're on to is like the ankle mobility and squatting. You know, so like why not just box squat? You don't have to worry about ankle mobility. You know what I mean? Because your shin's going to be perpendicular, so it takes the whole, and you're still developing glutes and hamstrings. In my opinion, even more so because you're keeping the knee back, so you're loading glutes and hamstrings more. You know what I mean? So, you know, it just makes sense. We had, in the 10 years, we had like, not that we didn't have kids that weren't great box squatters. We might have had like 5 kids that just couldn't do it. You know, like one kid that comes to mind was he was a basketball player. He was literally 7 feet tall, and he had never lifted before.
Oh, Jesus.
And I remember, like the one day he got pinned with 95 pounds. And it was just he hadn't done it, you know what I mean? His adductors were super weak. But within a few months, he was up around 200 pounds or so because he kind of got it, and you kind of meet them where they're at, and then let them get good at something, and everything kind of takes off. It's just super simple, really.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like for everything that you do, there's always one person that will go against everything that you believe. You know, if you coach this in one way, and you go and there's always going to be that one person that you just go, wait, how are you genetically made up in that way that you can't get this, and you know your hip socket's too deep, or you don't have the mobility in that, or you have too much mobility in that, which sometimes is another massive issue. We talk about mobility, but also, you know, too much mobility. If these kids are coming in and they're hyper mobile, Jesus Christ, for a strength coach, that's like red flag central. Like we want to be so ridiculously safe. We want to chuck black and yellow tape around everything and make sure that it's cordoned off, because you're like, oh man, you're one bad leg press away from a trip to A&E, my friend.
Yeah, we had a girl dislocate her kneecap getting out of a back extension machine. She didn't hyperextend her knee or anything. She was just getting out, and her freaking kneecap slipped off to the side. And I was in the room, and I hear her, she's saying, help, help. And I look over, I'm like, oh, great, she's got a hamstring cramp or whatever, you know. So I walk over, I'm like, what's going on? And her fucking kneecap is off on the side of her leg. She's like, something's wrong with my knee.
You're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not meant to be facing that way.
I was like, oh, shit, sit down. But just hypermobile. She had it happen in high school once before where it just slid off. So I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always something.
Yeah, 100%. So, listen, I wanna kind of wrap this up, and I always wrap up in the same way. And I'm very interested to kind of hear what you have to say. I want you to imagine for a second that you're taking a trip back in time, and you're visiting yourself, a much younger version of yourself, kind of 10, 12, 13 years of age. If you look back on everything that you've achieved, where you are today, and the progression that you've made throughout your career, undoubtedly you've done phenomenal things, and you've worked with some amazing people, and you've achieved some fantastic things. What bits of advice, what mantra, a quote, whatever it is, would you give to your younger self to help you get through to where you were to where you are today?
That's some deep shit. Probably don't talk yourself out of stuff. I think there's probably times where I had a good idea or was going to try to do something, and then you talk yourself out of it, like, oh, it's not going to work, or what's so and so going to say about that? If you fucking want to do something, just fucking do it. Fuck everyone else.
Yes. There's far too much bearing on what everyone else thinks in people's lives that I think hold them back from just the most ridiculous things. People can achieve amazing things, and they have the ability to, but it's just that one little, that one negative thought compared to the 1,199 others. That negative thought cancels all of those out. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, screw what everyone else thinks. You got to do you. I love that, man. Thank you so much for coming on board. I have absolutely loved this. I could sit here and literally chat to you all day. This is awesome. I hope you get to do it again sometime. I'll make sure that all of your social media and everything is in the show notes. But man, Nate, thank you very much for coming on board, man.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you, dude.